ओम श्री परमात्मने नमः। नारायणं नमस्कृते नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। श्रीमद् भगवद गीता साधक संजीवनी second chapter. Contents of the Gita summarized. Verses 39 to 53. Description of the discipline of action. Description of the discipline of action. The Lord in the next two verses permits Arjuna to be guided by even-mindedness already mentioned in the preceding verse, and he describes its glory. Verse 39. Esha te abhihitta sankhyaye buddhiryoge tva imam shrinu buddhya yukto yaya partha karma bandham prahasyasi. O Partha, Arjuna, this attitude of mind has been presented to you from the point of view of Jnana Yoga, discipline of knowledge. Now, hear the same as presented from the point of view of Karma Yoga, the discipline of selfless action. Equipped with this state of mind, you will be able to shake off completely the shackles of karma, action. Verse 40. नेहाभिक्रमनाशो अस्ति प्रत्यवायो न विद्यते स्वल्पम अप्यस्य धर्मस्यात्रायते महतोभ्यात्. In this path of disinterested action, there is no loss of effort, nor is there any adverse result. Even a little practice of this discipline protects one from great fear of birth and death. Something noteworthy about equanimity. People have formed an opinion that there is no use of constant remembrance of God unless there is concentration of mind. But the Gospel of the Gita does not attach much importance to this opinion. It attracts importance to equanimity. According to the Gita, the striver who has attained equanimity is an exalted soul. Even when a man is imbued with all qualities, if he does not gain equanimity, according to the Gita, he can't be called a perfect soul. The equanimity is of two kinds, of the mind and of the self. The Lord pervades everywhere equally. One who gets oneself established in Him gains victory over the world and is liberated. But this equanimity of the self can be known by equanimity of the mind. Equanimity of the mind consists in remaining even-minded in success and failure. Such a person remains even-minded in praise and reproach, success and failure, profit and loss, pleasure and pain, etc. This sort of equanimity never perishes, and it results in nothing but salvation. Whatever virtuous actions such as penance, charity and pilgrimage, etc. are performed by a man, they perish after giving their fruits. But equanimity does not perish, and it leads the man to salvation or God realization, while concentration of mind may lead him to accomplishments but not to salvation. In the next verse, Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna how to attain equanimity. Verse 41. Vyavasaitimika buddhir ekeha kurunandana bahu shakha hi anantascha buddhayo avyavasayinam. O joy of the Kurus, in this blessed path, the intellect is determinate and one-pointed, whereas the intellect of the undecided, infirm, is scattered in many directions and is endlessly diverse. Comment. To the seeker of God realization, the intellect is determinate and pointed, namely, he has only one decision, and that is to attain equanimity in the form of God realization. Attachment to the world is the main obstacle to this attainment of equanimity, and that can be removed through determinate intellect. Why is determinate intellect one? The reason is that in it there is renunciation of the desire for worldly objects, etc. This renunciation of desire is one whether it pertains to wealth and riches or honor and praise. But there are objects of different types and a person wants to acquire them. Just as there are different kinds of objects, such as different kinds of sweets. In the same way, there are endless desires to acquire numerous objects of various types in numerous ways. Therefore, a desirous person can't have one intellect. The informed in mind, being desire-ridden, clings to pleasures and prosperity, and so the intellect of such persons branch out endlessly. For example, they have a desire to get a son, and the means adopted for the fulfillment of the desire, such as medicine, incantation, oblation, and blessings of a saint, etc., are the branches of the same desire. Similarly, a man wants to get money. This is one desire, intellect, and business, service, theft, robbery, cheating, etc., are many branches of that intellect. Such a man with endless desires, having many branches, can't even take the decision about God realization. The ways of the infirm in mind, worldly people, have been described in the next three verses. Verses 42 and 43. Yam imam pushpitam vacham pravadantya avipaschitaha vedavadarataha partha nanyada astiti vadinaha कामात्मनः स्वर्गपराजन्म कर्म फलप्रदां क्रियाविशेषबहुलां भोगेश्वर्या गतिं प्रति. Arjuna, those who are obsessed by desires, who look upon heaven as the supreme goal and argue that there is nothing beyond heaven and pleasures, and who are devoted to the letter of the Vedas, are unwise. They utter flowery speech, recommending many acts of various kinds for the attainment of pleasure and prosperity, with rebirth as their fruit. Comment. Desire-ridden are those whose sole aim in life is to hunt after enjoyments. They think that it is nothing but desire which inspires a man to action, and without it a man is stone dead. Moreover, they identify themselves with desires. But the fact is that a man himself is a fragment of God and thus is eternal, while desires are fleeting and they increase and decrease. The self and desire are totally distinct, but desire-ridden people never realize this distinction. But it is only out of delusion that they identify themselves with desires. They are interested in the Vedas only for the sake of their ritualistic portions, which deal with the earthly and heavenly pleasures. The aim of their life is to enjoy celestial pleasures here and hereafter, rather than to attain God realization or emancipation. The speech of the Vedas is just flowery, with an attractive appearance without bearing any permanent fruit. Satisfaction comes out of fruit only, not from flowers and leaves. That flowery speech, instead of giving any permanent and eternal fruit, gives fruit which prolongs the wheel of birth. In the flowery speech, importance is attached to pleasures, and attachment to pleasures is the cause of the birth. That flowery speech deals with a number of rituals for the attainment of pleasure and prosperity. In these rituals, there is abundance of different kinds of rites involving various methods, various actions, objects, and strenuous physical labor. Verse 44. भोगेश्वरया प्रसक्तानां दयापहर्ता चेत्सां व्यवसायित्मिका बुद्धिः समाधौ न विद्यते. Those whose minds are carried away by such flowery speech, that is, who are attracted towards pleasures and who are deeply attached to pleasure and prosperity, can't attain the determinate intellect concentrated on God. Something noteworthy. All gracious God by His grace has bestowed discrimination upon human beings so that they may attain God or salvation. But human beings, giving cold shoulder to this discrimination, cling to pleasures like birds and animals. They forget that enjoyment of pleasures is not the goal of human life, but its supreme object is the attainment of perfection, and all the circumstances, whether favorable or unfavorable, they are placed in, are the means to attain perfection. God realization. So, they can't have the sole desire for God realization. The fact is that the worldly pleasures and objects are not the real obstacles to God realization, but attachment to them is the main hindrance. So long as this attachment continues, not to talk of God realization, the people can't even make up their minds to attain God because their minds are drawn away by worldly pleasures and prosperity, etc. To confirm something, it is necessary that one should view the pros and cons of the matter. In the previous three verses, there is the description of the infirm in mind who are obsessed by desires. Now, Lord Krishna inspires Arjuna to attain the ideal by being established in the eternal existence God, transcending the three gunas, attributes, and being free from all desires. Verse 45. Traigунया विश्य वेदा निस्त्राय गुण्यो भवार्जुना निर्द्वन्द्वो नित्य सत्वस्थो निर्योगाक्षेमा आत्मवान. O Arjuna, the Vedas deal with the three gunas, attributes, and their evaluates. Be free from those attributes, rise above the pairs of opposites, remain balanced, be unconcerned about the supply of wants and preservation of what has been already attained, and get established in the self. Comment. Here the Vedas have been used for the ritualistic portions of the Vedas which deal with the three gunas, attributes, and their evaluates in the form of worldly and heavenly enjoyments. Here the purpose is not to censure the Vedas, but it is to glorify the selfless spirit. In reference to the diamond and the piece of glass, the aim is to eulogize the diamond rather than to censure piece of glass. The Vedas don't only mention the means to satisfy desires of the worldly minded people, but they also contain sublime and elevating ideas on God and the means to realize Him. For a striver to transcend the worldly enjoyments, it is inevitable to be free from the pairs of opposites such as attachment and aversion, etc., because they are his real enemies and they are the stumbling block in his spiritual progress. When a striver gets rid of this delusion, he can worship him with a firm resolve. By transcending these pairs of opposites, he is easily freed from bondage. He becomes undeluded and he is not bound. Another thing is that if a person develops attachment for one person or a thing, he is sure to develop aversion to other persons or things. By having such attachment to the world, an aspirant turns indifferent to God. This indifference is a sort of aversion to God. But if he develops true devotion to God without having any attachment or aversion to the world, he develops total disinclination for it. This total disinclination has three stages. In the first stage, the aspirant has no hatred for unfavorable circumstances, but there is upeksha. In the second stage, there is udasinta, unconcernedness, while in the third stage, there is total disinclination. In the last stage, that is total disinclination, attachment and aversion are totally wiped out. If this process is considered minutely, we find that in upeksha there remain impressions of attachment and aversion. In Udasinta, the feelings of attachment and aversion remain, while in total disinclination, there are neither impressions nor feelings of attachment and aversion. In this state, attachment and aversion are totally wiped out. In the next verse, Lord Krishna explains what one achieves by transcending the three gunas, attributes. Verse 46. Yavan artha udpane sarvataha samplutodke तावान् सर्वेषु वेदेषु ब्राह्मणस्य विजानताः. A Brahmana who has obtained enlightenment has the same use for all the Vedas as one has for a small reservoir of water in a place flooded with water on all sides. Comment. A small reservoir of water is useful in a place where there is no other source of water, but nobody ever pays any attention to such a reservoir of water in a locality submerged with pure water. Moreover, that small reservoir of water becomes dirty and impure and can't be used for drinking purpose after washing and bathing in it. But the water of a large stream remains clean and pure even after washing and bathing in it. Likewise, oblations, charities, penances, and pilgrimages, etc., mentioned in the Vedas are of use to those who are still ignorant, but they become meaningless to the illumined souls who have realized God. In the 39th verse, Lord Krishna ordered Arjuna to listen to the discourse on evenness of mind. Now, in the next verse, he orders him to perform his duty in order to attain that equanimity, evenness of mind. Verse 47. Your right is to perform your duty only, but never lay claim to its fruit. Let not the fruit of action be your object, nor let your attachment be to inaction. Comment. Only human beings are eligible to perform new actions. The gods can perform new actions and can bestow money and material upon human beings according to the ordinance of the Lord, but they are too voluptuous to perform new actions. They are destined only to reap the fruit of their meritorious deeds. The creatures in hell also can't perform new actions. They suffer the fruits of their actions. God has bestowed this human birth, the very last of all births, so that by performing new actions in the form of selfless service to others, the man may achieve salvation and be free from the bondage of the cycle of birth and death. If he remains engaged in selfish actions, it will result in bondage. In case he is given to indolence and heedlessness, he will follow the cycle of birth and death. A vital fact. In all the other births, that is, those of birds, animals, insects, and even gods, the creatures can reap the fruits of their actions but can't perform new actions. There are two things about human life, namely, reaping the fruits of the deeds of earlier lives and performing new ones. God has bestowed upon him this human body so that by performing new virtuous actions without having a desire for their fruits, he may attain God realization or salvation. As far as the fruit of his previous actions is concerned, it may come in the form of favorable and unfavorable circumstances. He can't change those circumstances but can make proper use of them, and they can lead him to salvation if he uses them properly. An important fact which needs attention is that favorable or unfavorable circumstances can't make a man happy or sad. It is merely his ignorance which makes him happy or sad, because he identifies himself with those circumstances and thus becomes the experiencer of happiness or sadness. But if he gives a serious thought, he will come to know that the external circumstances can't make his internal self either happy or sad. He should make proper use of the favorable circumstances by serving others and of the undesirable ones by renouncing the desire to enjoy pleasures. In unfavorable circumstances, a man should not be perturbed, but should think that the sins which were committed to get pleasures are perishing in the form of unfavorable circumstances, and this thought is a kind of repentance for the sins committed. Secondly, it is a forewarning to us that we shall have to face adverse consequences if we commit sins again. So, we should perform actions for the welfare of all creatures rather than for our own pleasures. For insects, birds, and animals, etc., the fruit of past actions and also the present actions are only to work out their destinies. But in case of human beings, the fruit of past actions and also the present activities are the means for salvation. The means to be free from the desire for fruits of actions are as follows. 1. Desire causes a feeling of something lacking. Its fulfillment makes one a slave. Its non-fulfillment causes suffering. The pleasure derived out of fulfillment of desire gives birth to new desires, and a man goes on getting interested in performing new actions in order to reap their fruit. By understanding this fact in the right perspective, a man becomes free from the desire for fruit of actions. Second, actions have a beginning and an end. They are not eternal. So, how can their fruits be eternal? But the self is eternal. How can the eternal get any benefit from the perishable? By understanding this fact, he becomes detached from the world and attains God realization. In order to be free from desire for fruits of actions, an aspirant should have discrimination as well as the feelings to serve others. Discrimination will be helpful to a striver in renouncing his comforts, while the feelings of service to others will enable him to do good to others. By doing so, a striver can follow the discipline of disinterested action in the right sense. In this verse, the Lord means to say that a striver should remain detached from objects, men, action, incidents, circumstances, and physical, subtle, causal bodies, etc., without having the least affinity to them. In this verse, there are 4 points which need attention. 1. Your right is to perform your duty. Action only. 2. Never lay claim to its fruit. 3. Let the fruit of action not be your object. 4. Let your attachment not be to inaction. After ordering Arjuna to perform his duty in the preceding verse, now the Lord describes how he should remain even minded while performing actions. Verse 48. Yogastaha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyoha samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. O Dhananjaya, the conqueror of wealth, perform actions, duties, being fixed in yoga, renouncing attachment, having become even minded in success and failure. Equanimity is called yoga. Comment. A follower of the discipline of disinterested action should be so even minded while performing actions that he should not bother for their accomplishment or non accomplishment, for getting its fruit or not, for getting salvation or not. He should remain devoted to his duty. If an aspirant has not realized detachment and equanimity, he should aim at evenness of mind. By having this sort of approach, striver will attain equanimity finally, which will result in God realization or self realization. The essence of true yoga lies in even mindedness in the midst of success as well as failure. The person who ever keeps the mind in the poised state is called steadfast in yoga. Something noteworthy about intellect and equanimity. Intellect is of two kinds, indeterminate and determinate. The intellect of those whose aim is to enjoy worldly pleasures and prosperity is indeterminate, while The intellect of those whose aim is equanimity and salvation is determinate. Indeterminate intellects are endlessly diverse, while the determinate one is single. Those whose intellects are endlessly diverse are themselves undecided and are worldly, but those whose intellect is single have rightly resolved and they are strivers. Equanimity is of two kinds, of the mind and of the self. To remain even in favorable or unfavorable circumstances without having any attachment or aversion is equanimity of the mind, while equanimity of the self is union with God or spiritual illumination. There is a distinction between the worldly people and the strivers. The goal of the worldly people is to enjoy pleasure and prosperity, and their intellects are not determinate but are scattered in many directions and are endlessly diverse. On the other hand, the strivers' intellects are determinate, and the strivers in their practical life maintain equanimity in success and failure, profit and loss, and favorable and unfavorable circumstances without having attachment and aversion. Such strivers conquer the mortal plane and are established in the eternal. Now, in the next verse, Lord Krishna explains the superiority of the equanimity to a motivated action, namely action with a selfish motive. Verse 49. Durena heavaram karma buddhi yogad dhananjaya buddha sharanam anvichha kripanaha phala hetvaha. O Dhananjaya, action with a selfish motive is far inferior to that performed with equanimity of mind. Seek refuge in this evenness of mind, for wretched are those who crave for fruit of action. Comment. Actions without equanimity mislead to pain as well as the cycle of birth and death because they have no power to lead to salvation. Equanimity is an art to naturalize actions. If there is no equanimity, one will develop one's egoism and attachment to the body. This sort of egoism and attachment is beastly. As light is the contrary of darkness, an action performed with equanimity of mind is contrary to the action performed with a selfish motive, because an action performed with equanimity leads to God realization, while motivated actions mislead to the wheel of birth and death. The eternal substance is different from perishable actions and the fruits of actions. What can be more ignoble than this, that the eternal substance should be subservient to the perishable fruit of action? In the next verse, Lord Krishna explains the result of equanimity of mind. Verse 50. Buddhi yukto jahati ha ubhe sukrita dushkrite tasmad yogaya yujyasva yogaha karmasu koshlam. Endowed with equanimity, one frees oneself in this life from good, virtue, and evil, vice, alike. Therefore, devote yourself to this yoga of equanimity. Skill in actions lies in the practice of this yoga. Comment. The persons endowed with equanimity become free from virtues and vices like omnipresent God. In the state of equanimity, a man while living in the world detaches himself from the world and remains untouched by virtues and sins as a lotus leaf by water. The man himself is sentient and is free from virtue and sin by identifying himself with the unreal body, etc. Sins and virtues accrue. If he does not identify himself with the unreal, he will remain untouched by virtues and sins just like ether. Now the Lord gives examples to substantiate what has been said in the preceding verse. Verse 51. Karma jambuddhi yukta hi phallam tyaktva manishinaha janma bandha vinirmuktaha padam gachantyayamyam. Wise men endowed with equanimity, renouncing the fruits of actions, freed from the shackles of births, attain the blissful supreme state. Comment. Those endowed with equanimity are really wise. An action, even without a desire for its fruit, will bear fruit. No one can dispense with its fruit. Suppose a farmer sows seed without a selfish motive, will he not get corn? He will definitely get corn. In the same way, if a person works in a detached spirit, he will get its fruit. Therefore, renunciation of fruit means renunciation of manifest and latent desires for fruit and attachment for fruit. All people are free and capable of renouncing such desires. The wise people endowed with equanimity attain the state which is free from any kind of blemish. He has not to follow the wheel of birth and death. In the next two verses, Lord Krishna explains the steps to attain the blissful supreme state which is free from blemish. Verse 52. Yada te moha kalilam buddhirvyati tarishyati tada gandasi nirvedam shrutavyasya shrutasya cha. When your intellect crosses the mire of delusion, you will then gain indifference to what has been heard and what is yet to be heard about this world and the next. Comment. The opinion which favors egoism in this body and attachment for the body, family, kinsmen, and objects is called delusion. Actually, there are no egoism and attachment for the body, etc. They are merely assumed. Pleasure and displeasure in favorable and unfavorable circumstances and evils such as partiality, hatred, envy, and jealousy, etc., are called mire. When the intellect of a man gets entangled in this mire of delusion, he is perplexed and can't think properly. He himself is sentient, but by accepting his affinity for the insentient body and things, etc., he identifies himself with them. Thus, by closing his eyes to the real target, he gets engrossed in worldly pleasures and prosperity. This is called entanglement in the mire of delusion. But the intellect which takes the firm decision to be free from the worldly pleasures and prosperity and to attain salvation is called the intellect transcending the mire of delusion. There are two means to cross the mire of delusion: discrimination and selfless service. Acute discrimination between the real and the unreal makes one indifferent to the unreal world, and a keen desire for selfless service for the welfare of others enables one to renounce the desire for one's own pleasures in the same way as when a disciple for his preceptor, a son for parents, a servant for his master develop taste for providing all sorts of comforts to them. Then their own desires melt away. The discipline of knowledge is somewhat difficult to practice because the desire for pleasure lingers on in it. When the striver comes across pleasures, he deviates from his spiritual path and inclines towards them. But the striver who has the feeling of service to others utilizes the material for the service of others, and thus his desire for pleasures perishes easily. Verse 53. Shruti vipratipanate yada sthasyati nischala samadhavachla buddhistada yogam avapsyasi. When your intellect confused by hearing conflicting doctrines has become immovable and firm, steady in meditation on God, you will then attain self-realization or union with God. Comment. Arjuna was in a fix whether he should perform his duty as a Kshatriya or he should avoid the slaughter of his kith and kin. If he protected his family, he would shirk his duty. If he performed his duty of fighting, then the family would not be protected. So he was bewildered. First of all, the striver is unable to make up his mind whether to have honest and sincere dealings with the worldly people or to attain God. Then he decides that he has to render selfless service to the world. Having taken this decision, he starts showing indifference and dispassion to the worldly pleasures. Then, in the spiritual path, he comes across different opinions of the scriptures. So, it becomes difficult for him to decide which opinion he should follow. In that case, by good company or faith, etc., he is either able to take the decision or he surrenders himself to God. Then, by God's grace, his intellect becomes immovable. Secondly, in all the scriptures and religions, God, soul, and the world have been described in different forms and ways, but all of them agree I am soul, not body. The world is to be left, God is to be realized. By taking this decision, the intellect of the striver becomes steady. Then the striver realizes God easily. So the only obstacle to God realization is lack of firmness of intellect. The more deficiency in reaching at a decision regarding the contrary spiritual doctrines and in his own emancipation, the more delay there is. But in both, as soon as the intellect becomes steady and determinate, eternal union with God is realized. Om Tat Sat. All glories to Sri Partha Sarthi, Lord Sri Krishna. All glories to Bhagavad Vani, Srimad Bhagavad-Gita. Shri Hari Arpanamastu.